Justin, what's going on with you, man?
All right. Well, we're doing it. Oh, yep. I'm doing all right. How about you? Just holding it down, trying to get caffeinated.
Yeah, for real. I was up till 5 last night.
My boy, you can't be doing that. We're past 30 now, dog. What are you doing?
Yeah.
You're going to regret that.
Well, college football 25 came out, so.
Dude, I hate Wake Forest. I've been beat so many times by that team. Stupid All-American.
How many times have you played them?
30, probably. I mean, it's hard to count when all that rage is going through your body. Not one win, dude. All-American mode. I don't know what's going on with that stuff. They're just so stupid. I hate it.
Anyways,
yeah.
So I'm actually really excited to be back.
Yeah, dude.
We got kind of, I call it session 0, the first time we came in here and recorded.
Right.
We haven't even put that footage anywhere, but I think it was a good exercise to kind of give us a just kind of hit the ground running
for sure
and figure out exactly what we're doing. And if you're here and wondering what it is we're doing, my name's Landon. This is Justin.
What's up, guys?
Justin is I don't want to steal your thunder, or maybe that's not the phrase I'm looking for. But
you can give me
what
an intro.
is I don't want to mess your title up. What is your official title as far as you being a therapist?
Yeah, my official title is a licensed marriage and family therapist. As the title suggests, I specialize in relationships. But the misnomer about it, though, Landon, is that sometimes people hear that, they think, oh, he must only be good with couples and families.
Yeah.
Really, it's about relationships. So that includes families of all types, couples of all types, and your relationship with yourself and the world around it, because we exist in relationship. But that's, let's not get, I don't want to get too dark.
Yeah, and I don't want to jump too down, but it is interesting that you said relationship with yourself. That's a big one that I think a lot of people forget about.
Yes, Lord.
As far as I'm concerned, my name's Landon. I'm just a guy.
Yeah.
I've known Justin a very long time. We've been very good friends. And over the years, we kind of figured out that we really like talking about this stuff. We like kind of digging into topics, particularly for men, because obviously we're men.
Right.
We like diving into things that are taboo's not the word. I think society can sometimes make it taboo.
Right.
But we like to talk about things that men struggle with that aren't necessarily always said out in the open.
Sure.
There's a lot there, and I don't know. I'm happy to be back. I know for today's topic, we're going to be talking about how can an environment basically be fostered where men can talk about their struggles and feelings and whatever it is they're going through.
Yeah.
Because even though we like to talk about these things, I'm not necessarily in my everyday life parading around talking to everyone about my problems.
Yeah.
I think so. Between us, we've been able to foster an environment where we can talk about those things with each other.
Right.
And I do think in that area we can just give a little bit of insight as far as what it is that what it took to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there's more to it than just, we're just really good friends. Certainly that helps.
Oh yeah, man, I've been playing mental tricks on you for this whole time.
Yeah, he could be manipulating me for the better part.
Manipulation? Nah, strategy, dog.
Strategy, okay. That sounds very manipulative.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to say it, no, I'm just kidding. No, man, but I mean, I think, like you said, dude, I mean, having those conversations is a challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Whether or not you're motivated to be that way, be the person who is more open about that stuff. Regardless if you're open about it or not, it's still a challenge. Partly because of how we're trained to be as, I should say this, cisgendered, straight, heterosexual men.
Yeah.
Especially in our culture, we live in the South. And so there's some Southern things about manhood and masculinity that don't always include talking about feelings. Right. But I think, and tell me what you think, man, I think that anecdotally, I guess, but overall, I've seen a lot of guys compared to maybe the previous generations, have a lot more value placed on talking about certain things, opening up about certain things, wanting their children to feel comfortable, opening up to them about certain things, and kind of being a little bit more on the whole motivated to talk more about emotions, feelings, and everything related to that.
Yeah, I think so. I think I can speak to that just in my personal life. And shout out to Dad. I love you, Dad. I love my parents. Don't get me wrong. I have great parents. But something I've observed, especially as I've gotten older, there was a lack of, particularly men in the last generation, there was a lack of really environments to talk about those things.
Facts.
And I could see how that has affected that generation.
Facts.
As far as the repercussions coming later in life on how they they treat their family and how that what they call generational issues, how those continue and pass down, because it's a pattern, right?
Yeah.
I think that's pretty well known. But yeah, I mean, I can see it in my personal life, because I personally value those things. I can't speak for everyone my age, but that's always been kind of something in the back of my head that I thought, even I can remember even being like, as a young teenager, being like, why as a boy or a man do I feel uncomfortable talking about these things?
Yeah.
And as I got older, I realized, through obviously meeting people like you and basically people my age and my peers, we almost came to a consolidation that, like, why are we keeping these things inside? Why can we not talk about these things? And I know that we've talked about this before. Me and you come from very different backgrounds. For me, thankfully, for the most part, my dad was actually pretty, I would say, obviously not perfect, but I would say compared to most men from that generation, pretty good about, like, listening to me and hearing me out. But what was that experience like for you in comparison to kind of how it was for me?
It was different, man. It was different. I mean, so a little bit about the background, without getting into the details of it. So I've always been a thinker, right? Ever since I could remember. I remember being a little kid and just thinking about, like, my conversations with my friends, thinking about how they're wording things, what they meant by that, what they didn't mean by that, how am I going to respond, what are they maybe thinking about how I'm going to say those types of things. And so my mind was always geared to that. Luckily, I turned a new career, so it worked out. But that seemed to be, especially early life, teenage years, young adulthood, that seemed to be more like the minority way to think about that stuff in terms of, like, emotion and feelings and all these other things. What really, like, motivated me, especially as a late teenager, to be more open about that kind of stuff was because I actually knew several people who had committed suicide, who I had knew personally. And that was really tough because, they were young guys like I was. Never would have known that they had gone through whatever it was they were going through at the time. And so that kind of stuff is like, man, when things like that happen, that really just takes out all the wind of these socially understood norms and whatever. Like, all that stuff goes out the window when something that real happens.
When it hits the fan.
Yeah, dude.
It hits the fan.
Yeah, man. And so I got a lot more motivated about that kind of stuff and realized that a lot of it, for a lot of guys that I had met, yourself included, like, it wasn't that we don't want to talk about these things, or we have some kind of problem with it. It's just that we don't always exactly know how to go about doing that. We don't exactly know how do we know when it's comfortable to talk about that kind of stuff, especially with people maybe you've known, but you don't know if they want to go there with you. You don't know if they're going to think you're weird, strange, whatever.
Well, I mean, it's not exactly the best icebreaker.
Sure.
And to be clear, and you might have a different opinion, but that's probably a good thing. You should, to some extent, protect those parts of your life. You shouldn't be out here just telling.
No, man, because that's the other side of it, man. When I talk to folks, it's like some of them is we want to do that, right? We want to have this avenue, but how do we know when we're going too far? You know what I mean? Like, how do we know when we're trauma dumping on somebody unnecessarily, or or something like that? And again, even that has its value to a certain point, but the question is, to what point, right? And that can be somewhat of a challenge too. So part of it is like opening up, but not opening up too much, but opening up enough where you don't feel alone and isolated. But and vice versa, where the people around you don't feel that way either. But they also don't like go, oh my God, Landon's over here just venting his crap out of, you know what I mean? Like, I got a thing. Because even if that's not real, if you think it's real, then it might as well be real. Because you're going to react to it like it's real.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, I think talking about these things that we're talking about, man, about how to create that and cultivate that environment and that ability amongst your bros to be able to have that conversation. I think that's super, super important, man.
Yeah, and I'm actually so glad that because you brought up a word that's going to be kind of one of kind of a topic that we covered today. You said the word isolation.
Yeah.
So again, we're talking about how can we foster an environment where men can be comfortable talking with each other.
Yeah.
But and not just between men. I think with people in general, men, women, whatever. Mm-hmm. There is a glorification of isolation.
Absolutely.
There is this idea that. Don't get me wrong, independence is okay. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with being independent, but I do think sometimes it gets glorified to a point where it hurts people.
Yeah.
Especially for men. Mm-hmm. I can remember, well, even to this day, like, this idea that we're supposed to, and like it's cliche. You've heard like we're not, by no means are we breaking news on like what society, how society feels about men's feelings, but it's really not a secret that guys are a lot of times are told to whatever you feel to just kind of shut up, keep it to yourself. Don't show weakness. Where do you think? I guess I want to start with this. Where do you think this glorification of isolation kind of roots from, or where does it come from?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So you ready to jump down the rabbit hole real quick with me?
All
right. Let's do this. All right. So man. So when it comes to this isolation thing, okay. So the way I tend to think about it, and I ain't the beholder of all truth here, just a dude with an opinion, right? So I think of it kind of like on a spectrum, right? On the one hand, you have independence when you talk about like this lone wolf type island in the middle of the ocean type kind of thought process. On the other end of the extreme, you have what people typically term as codependent, right? Where you can't do anything in isolation and you always kind of be like whatever. And so people oftentimes, it seems, feel like you have to kind of choose one or the other. I tend to lean more to this idea of somewhere in between. The term typically used is called interdependent, right? Where we're not isolated, but we're not completely codependent, in air quotes, codependent. We exist in relationship with one another, and we can have distance and closeness, but that can be very dynamic, very fluid, and doesn't have to be like this one time set it and forget it type thing. So I think that's part of it. So some of it is just about this idea that there's more moral weight to being independent than it is to be codependent, right? If you find somebody is in what we would traditionally find as codependent, what do people normally say about that? Man, I don't know. Like that don't sound healthy. God, I hate that. But that don't sound healthy. They don't sound good. They don't sound normal, right? But then all of a sudden when you say, yeah, I can move out into a cabin in the middle of the woods and not deal with nobody for three months, everybody's like, oh man, you're such a stoic. You know what I mean? Like you're so like rock solid. That's a real man.
Problem is they wouldn't be able to call you to tell you that.
Right. right. And so there's definitely some elements to that, just like this value that we place on it societally. But even like more on a different level, man. Tell me what you think about this. So like when people talk about that, like I want to be more independent. Independent according to who? Yeah. Right? Sometimes it's according to you, but how did you get that standard of independence? You got it from people, which is not then an independent thought. So you got it from relationships. Right. So when you talk about I want to be independent, you want to be independent according to these people that you're not independent from. Right. And so there's an element of that. But
well, and don't mean to cut you off, but I think there's an element of it's human nature to want to be accepted. Yeah. And for whatever reason, we have placed so much value on being hyper independent. Right. That we're willing to go, and I think we're all guilty of it to some extent. I know I am. We're all willing to go to great lengths to prove to people that we can handle anything and everything on our own without any help. Particularly men, because that's, and you even see it in our media. Yeah. Like, and it's cliche, but like the masculine heroes that we see in our movies, even as far as like hip hop artists and our music and all these things, I would say 99% of the time it's men depicted as not needing anyone or anything and being able to take care of everything on their own, or at least most things on their own. But like most things in Hollywood, the media, music, it's just not grounded in reality. Right. It's only part of the story. Right. Go back to where did it come from? So we have to appreciate the social backdrop that we just talked about. Yeah. But then we also have to think about like most men, at least in our world, in the Western society, and men, we don't get a lot of practice from an early age turning our thoughts and feelings into words. And so there's a lot of reasons for that. We could spend days talking about that. But when you don't have a lot of practice from the time you're little to the time you become a grown man or whatever it is, then when somebody comes along and says, hey man, talk to me about what you're feeling, but you ain't got no practice. One, you're going to feel real uncomfortable. Two, you don't know if you're going to say the right thing or not. And then three, you don't know if it's really like how you feel. You're just kind of guessing, right? Because again, we don't have a lot of practice. So what is the tendency? The tendency then is to avoid it, especially because it's uncomfortable, or maybe you look weird or whatever it is. So there's definitely an element to that. Another factor that I gotta highlight, man, because this is I think it's such a big deal, and it's definitely gonna come up in some of our later conversations. But like when you're a little boy in the world and you're brought up in how we socialize little boys, at least here in the Western world, feelings typically, like you said, are not necessarily like something that's
encouraged for little boys to talk about all the time, except for one. Can you guess what feeling that is?
Anger.
Anger.
Yeah.
Anger is something that is normally, in terms of like the I guess a typical way of socializing a boy, that's the only real feeling or emotion that gets validated on any level.
Yeah, I've actually never even thought about it, but yeah, that's true.
Yeah, man. So what happens when you don't have a lot of practice taking your thoughts and words and turn them into, or thoughts and feelings turn them into words, is that you then experience everything has to be filtered through this one lens that is socially validated. So like if I'm confused, I'm gonna get mad about it. If I'm surprised in a way that I don't like, I'm gonna get mad about it.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm sad, if I'm grieving something or I'm going through something, I'm gonna get mad about it. Right. And so everything kind of gets filtered through this lens because that's in some ways that's the only one that gets actually any type of validity. Because at least in theory, on a certain level, people listen to you when you're upset. But people don't really listen to you, or you may not feel like people really listen to you if you're sitting breaking down crying over some stuff that you feel overwhelmed about. Right. So again, so that social validation part, that's a big part of it. And I think a lot of where that glorification of isolation comes from. Man.
Yeah, I think so too. Kind of moving on here. So again, fostering an environment for men to talk about things they're going through. Obviously, there's an element of trust there.
Mm-hmm.
There's an element of vulnerability, having to open up with those topics, and those are very like. I can already feel like a lot of the men listening to this being like, ooh, vulnerability.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I don't know how to
Right.
Like that's just not something I do. But I guess kind of what I want to bounce off of you is what does it take to, I guess, get to a point where you can trust someone to have those conversations? Because like we kind of alluded to at the beginning of the podcast, or really said, you obviously shouldn't be going around telling anyone and everyone your business for the sake of trying to,
right.
Like, in a perfect world, you could do that. In a perfect world, you could walk up to anyone and everyone and talk about what you're going through, and they would be receptive and it'd be fine. But as you know, and as you guys know, that's not the world we live in.
Mm-hmm.
So what is so I guess kind of, and I don't even have this really like bulleted here, but it just kind of popped up here. What is it, who are the people that you should be reaching out to that you believe you can trust? And ultimately, like, that's a bit of an open-ended question because like only you know who you can trust, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to tell you who you can open up to, but who is the type of person or who is it in your life that maybe you should lean towards opening up about those things?
The people who you feel like it's worth taking a risk with.
Yeah.
And that's such an important thing.
Which seems like, I'm sorry, that seems like so like obvious, but it's true. It's true when you hear it out loud.
But here's the thing though, Landon. So I want to build off something you said there, man, because you said, obviously you'll know who you feel like that could be. And that's one thing I'm real big on, just like personally and also in therapy and stuff. My biggest thing is like, you should know you. And obviously that's not like a either or type of thing. It's not like a situation where either you know yourself or you know everything else, whatever. It's an ongoing growth process, right? But my big thing about it is if I can help you know you and know what you think and know what you feel, then you'll be able to take that information and base your decisions off of that. If I can help you trust yourself in some of these things and trust yourself within reason, because sometimes, like, you know, there's factors you can't control, right? But if you know there are certain people in your life you feel a little bit more comfortable taking that risk with than other folks, then maybe we should start there. Here's the other thing too, Landon. I really want to make sure I weasel this in here, man, because let's say you're a guy and you do want to kind of have this emotional support kind of.
Yeah, let's say I'm a guy.
Yeah, you know what I mean. But like, let's say that's the case. Oh, I guess I mean in particular that you don't have this emotional support stuff and you would want it. Chances are high, Landon, and I'm just guessing here, but chances are high that if not just you, but any person in that situation, if I asked you to go find that for yourself, you might have a lot of. But if somebody else, like another guy, came to you and was like, "Hey man, I'm really going through a lot. Can you help me out?" Most of us, because of that provider kind of mentality, would have no problem being like, "Dude, I got you."
Yeah, that's interesting because that kind of goes back to, and it's a very like old saying, but it's true. I'm really good at giving advice. I'm not good at taking my own advice. And I think that and I mean, I can certainly attest to that's how I feel sometimes, but I think that kind of resonates with, I would argue probably most men, is we're very good at like providing an answer, telling someone what they should do, but we're very bad at putting that practice in our own lives.
To say it a different way, man.
Yeah.
We're really good at being the comforter, not necessarily being the one who's being comforted.
Mm.
And, so this is a little bit of a stretch, but I think you know what I'm saying. Lots of guys, man, have never really truly felt understood by anybody but their mother or their grandmother, and in some cases, not even that. So a lot of times when we talk about like emotional support and trying to find it, so many folks don't even really know what they're looking for because maybe they never felt it, or maybe they did, but it was in such a specific situation and circumstance that it's a lot more challenging to find it everywhere else. So you find people, for instance, like looking for motherly type comforts from their romantic partner, that type of thing, because it's so localized that it's hard to branch out into other stuff. So part of this whole problem is that we don't always know what we're looking for. And in certain situations, I think what can be helpful is looking at it through the inverse. When we're talking about trying to build you an emotional support system, again, what kind of people in your life you're more comfortable taking that risk with. And then also at the same time, how can, when you know that that's the case, when you know that's what you want to do, what do you know that you don't want this to be like? Because you might not know what it feels like to feel understood, to feel like someone got your back, but you dang sure know what it better not feel like, right? So sometimes just having that little base information can really help you. So because what it is, you're going to take a risk, right? You're going to go start a conversation with these people you feel like it's kind of worth it. There are certain things maybe you don't want to feel too comfortable opening up with right away, but maybe there's a couple of things where you say, all right, that's okay, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that little bit of vulnerability. That's the thing, man. We got to be able to like push ourselves to the point of discomfort. Because change is always going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But we don't want to go so far that we feel totally exposed and overly vulnerable. Because then, even if it goes right, we're going to be so like overstimulated by all of it that we're going to like reject it, even if it goes well.
So I know we've a lot of what we've been hitting on here recently, and correct me if I'm wrong, is coming from the perspective of somebody reaching out for help. How can I reach out to help or build up, get through that fear of asking for help? But how can a person or an individual, how can they be, how can somebody work on themselves to be that environment for someone?
Yeah. Again, I think it goes back to a lot of the same principles, which is taking a risk, right? And that is, sometimes not even adding to a conversation, but just stating something. Like, for instance, like, hey, bro, I feel like you've been going through a lot, man. If you need anything, I got you.
And you've done that for me.
Mm-hmm.
I can think of multiple times throughout the years where you knew I was going through things, or you knew there was a situation going on in my life, and you would reach out to me. So I do think sometimes it's not always the person that needs help that is the one reaching out.
Right.
I think, in fact, I would argue probably a lot of times someone who's in a moment of crisis or someone who's needing help is hoping somebody reaches out to them.
Yeah.
I know that whenever I've been going through things, and there have been times, where I have reached out.
Yeah.
But it always felt good knowing that whether it was you or another friend of mine or a loved one, whenever they would reach out to me, it hit a little different. Because it's one thing for me to reach out and tell you what I'm going on, or what I'm going through. But it's another thing when you're on someone's mind and they reach out to you unprompted.
Yeah.
And I think that provided a lot of environments for me where I was like, oh, okay, like they genuinely care. I can share what's going on with them.
Exactly, man. And it can just be something straightforward, like a statement. It don't have to be open-ended. Hey, man, what you been got going on?
Yeah.
Or something like that. It can just be like that kind of statement. And to be honest with you, man, obviously, like I'm a trained professional, right? So I understand the importance of like not being emotionally isolated or something like that, right? But I had that mindset even way before I was a therapist, because again, going back to those tragedies that I had been exposed to, right? When you go to those kind of tragedies or you know about that kind of stuff, all of a sudden, like what's considered weird or normal don't really make a lot of difference. So I was doing that for folks long ago because I don't care if it's weird. I'd rather it be, I don't care if it's weird or not. You could think I'm weird or not. It don't really make no difference to me because this is what I know I want to be. Yeah. Because I know myself. Yeah. Right? Going back to that knowing yourself type thing. So yeah, man, I think if you want to be that type of person, it again involves a certain level of risk because you might get interpreted as being weird or strange or whatever, depending on your social circle, depending on the situation. It might be that. But does that matter to you? Does that really make a difference to you? Like if they think you're weird because you're checking on them, what are we doing? If y'all are supposed to be friends.
Well, at that point, I would do some self-reflecting on the relationship.
I'm saying if they're supposed to be, if we're supposed to be friends and you think I'm weird because I checked on you because I thought you might have been going through something. Or even if not, I just want to let you know I'm here for you if you ever need it. If you think that's weird and we're supposed to be friends, then bro, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And
the word friend gets thrown around a lot too.
Facts.
I know, everybody and your mom is your friend. Like, oh, I know, like I met them once, they're my friend. Like, so the word friend gets thrown around a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And not to inject too much of this into it, because we're not religious. This isn't a religious podcast, but I do think religion or belief set aside, I do think that it holds value in that the biblical definition of a friend is essentially someone, this isn't word for word obviously, but essentially someone you would lay your life down for.
Yeah.
And I think about that sometimes and I go, and I kind of reflect on, okay, who are my friends? Who are the people that I can that there is an environment where I can have those conversations with them? I think a lot of people run into, and I mean, I've made this mistake before too, where I've trauma dumped on someone who I thought was a friend, someone who I thought was there for me. And I don't even talk to those people anymore. Like, I haven't talked to them for years.
And so let's pick up on that right there, man. Because see, sometimes we feel like because they're not there anymore, that it was a bad decision to like open up to them.
Sure.
But bro, I mean, and I know I'm not saying you feel this way.
No, go ahead.
But like, that's not. Like, just because the results didn't work out, don't mean the strategy was bad.
Right.
And there are a lot of things, talked about friends and the definition. Like, social media really has changed a lot of the definitions we give to friends. And social media can be a great thing in terms of like that support. I mean, there are forums, there are different avenues and channels you can go to have people who want to be there for folks. And sometimes having that like, what am I called, degree of separation where you're not physically there in the room. Sometimes that can actually help the vulnerability process. But I'm a big fan of all that stuff as long as it don't within reason, right? Because everything's about balance. So we need to be able to have stuff like that. Ideally in person. If not, we could do it online. We could do it over game chat. We can do it over whatever. But it's just an important thing. And it doesn't have to be this really stuffy, kind of like Hallmark card, you know what I mean, kind of conversation. It can just be real lighthearted, real chill, but also when we need to be kind of serious,
Yeah, no, absolutely. So kind of moving on here. So I think a lot of things that hold people back from having this conversation is this idea of, well, it's just fear. But we kind of before this podcast, we kind of briefly talked about this the other night. Why is fear a good place to start for having these conversations between men, being able to talk about the things that we're going through? Because I mean, that's a lot of people get stopped at the fear. But why? But what's healthy about that? Why is it good to have? I guess what I'm asking is, why is it good that fear is present?
Why is it good that fear is present? Because it stops you from going too far.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it brings to your attention why this challenge is so challenging. That's number one. Number two,
I would like to add, because this kind of popped in my head here, but I think it's true. The fear lets you know that you care.
Yeah. You don't get scared of something you don't care about.
Right.
Yeah. And I tell people this all the time, and like, fear is never a good long-term motivator, but it can be a good short-term like spark igniter kind of thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes, that fear can be what starts the process, but fear would never be what continues the process. What continues it is some type of motivation that goes beyond just like a discomfort, right? We're wired that when we fear stuff, we either fight it or run away from it, right? But then there's some other options, but generally that's the kind of way we think about it. So what is the tendency then if I am a little, what I'm going to use the term, fearful about becoming vulnerable with people who may betray me? Or maybe I've been betrayed before and that's like a memory that's still kind of fresh. Or maybe I opened up some people that ain't there no more, even though they say that was my brother and now he ain't around me no more. So that there's kind of hesitation and fear there. So what's going to push me past that point? It's not going to be because I just mentally know it's a great idea, so I'm going to go do it. Bro, if we did everything that knowledge-wise we know is good for us, even if we didn't feel like it, bro, we'd be in a whole different process, like in society and as people.
Yeah.
Right. And so knowing something doesn't always stop you from feeling a certain type of thing. Right. So we might feel fearful, but even though we know there's nothing to fear, or vice versa. So we got to be able to like say, okay, I am uncomfortable with this. So maybe I don't need to go too far, but I need to go somewhere, bro. Because if I'm wherever I'm at in life and I'm feeling all alone and I got all these people around me and I'm in a room full of people that say they care about me and yet I don't know if anybody really does, that's not a good place to stay for the next 30 years, bro. And if I'm going to get out of that in any kind of way, I got to take some steps that are going to feel fearful, that are going to feel like a risk, and I got to do it. Because if not, I know what I'm going to get, and it's whatever I've been in this whole time.
And I think that, because what that sounds like is if people keep, I guess, trauma dumping into those circles that are unhealthy for them, I think that a lot of times gets people trapped in the way that they're living. Because, let's be honest, not everyone has an equal upbringing. There are children who are given environments to talk about these things in a more healthy way compared to other children.
Right.
And I think kind of what you were talking about there, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think kind of what you were talking about there is this idea that, honestly, it can kind of get boiled down to being around the wrong people and depending on the wrong people to help you through those things.
Definitely.
It gets you stuck in a pattern of behavior that, and I think sometimes it gets to the point where people cannot get out of the lifestyle that they're in.
Yeah.
And so, I guess obviously not saying that you're in that lifestyle anymore, but I know a little bit about your past. You told me about it, and you've told me it sounds like you kind of grew up in some rather unhealthy environments around people like that.
Yeah.
Probably to the point where you didn't feel like you could talk about what you were going through because if anything, it was probably a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
Where if you showed weakness, then that was something that people could pick at.
Yeah.
So what was that like? And so we're kind of coming out of this area of we're talking about these general concepts of what we knew, and now we're kind of getting down to a more personal level.
Sure.
And I can start with me. So for example, for me, even though we have different backgrounds, I think some of them tie together. So I grew up Southern Baptist. Dad was a minister, music minister specifically. So I grew up with this idea that it was harder for me. It wasn't so much as I got older, but as a younger person, it was harder for me to talk about things because in a lot of ways I had this idea that, well, because I'm this Christian, because I'm this minister's son, I can't be going through these things. I don't want to talk to people about mistakes I made or things that I'm struggling with. And so in a way that was my own survival mechanism. But I guess kind of what I wanted to bounce to you is, what was it like for you going through that and then transitioning into adulthood and kind of pulling yourself out of that pattern of that using that survival mechanism to not show weakness?
Yeah, so part of it was because I didn't even know that I was surviving because it was just normal.
It was just,
Yeah, it was just normal. I ended up getting out of the environment I was in because, for lack of a better way to describe it, my grandparents kind of adopted me and kind of got me up out of there. So that had nothing really to do with me. And so then, though, because of that, I went to a new school with new people around different folks. I lived in a different environment. It's a lot more calm, right, where I was living then. So the things that I had thought were normal were all of a sudden not my normal experience anymore. So I still had some old ways of thinking and doing and moving, right? And so you don't just get accustomed to that overnight. But it helped me pay attention to the fact that what I had thought was normal is only actually one possibility. And there are actually other possibilities. And even in that, right, there are still branches of those things that are, not always what I would think they were. So, for instance, not everybody who comes from middle-class America has a wholesome family.
Right.
But when you grow up not in middle-class America, it's easy to think that's like middle-class America. That's what they do. They gather around Thanksgiving dinner, everybody happy, everybody get along, and everybody cutting the turkey in the middle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's easy to think that way. Right. It's easy to think that way when you don't know. Then you get over there and you realize, some of them folks just, or if not more, dysfunctional. They just got more money, or at least the perception of more money. So man, I think some of it is just like the perspective part. But then, also going through some of those things and realizing because of that perspective that no matter where you come from, a lot of our journey is the same, because at least in you and I grew up in poverty. You grew up I grew up in a single parent household. I was effectively a father from a very early age. And obviously you had a much different experience, but we're still raised in the cultural South. We're still raised in Western America. So there is a lot of things, a lot of challenges that we're going to find similar, even if it plays out a little bit different.
Sure.
Right. And so yeah, man, I think it's just, having that perspective over time. But when you don't have that, or when it doesn't seem like you're able to get that, a lot of times it just starts with this idea of like, bro, this cannot be all it is. You know, if I am surrounded by people, like you said earlier, who are not good for me, that means that I have some kind of awareness that this is not good for me, which means that I have, at least in theory, some idea of what would be.
And I think that probably one of the more uncomfortable aspects of that is there are times where if you find yourself in that situation where there isn't anyone you feel safe that you can go and talk to, then it may be time to make some hard decisions and really reflect on who you're spending your time around and the environment you're in. Because it's very, like we talked about earlier, it's very easy to get caught up in the friend thing. But if you indeed find yourself in that situation, I mean, in my opinion at least, those people are probably not your friends, and they probably don't seem to care as much as maybe you hope or think they do.
And listen, my boy,
and some hard decisions may have to be made where you may have to. I don't like using the term like cut people off. You know, that sounds a little like.
Well, you need to renegotiate some boundaries, probably.
Yeah.
But I would say this, man, to kind of piggyback off that. If you find yourself in any of that, or at all, or you know, you feel like maybe there's more to yourself that you want to understand, go to therapy, dog.
Yeah.
Come see people like me. Obviously, this is not therapy, and I'm not nobody's therapist in this capacity. Right. But like, go to a website, Psychology Today. It's like Google for therapists. Find somebody. Like, there are free options in a lot of cities, right? So you go find somebody and open up and start doing that. And therapy is a great place to start because obviously it's all confidential. Unless you tell me you're gonna go kill somebody, or you're gonna hurt some babies or something. But like, other than that, it's all confidential. So like, you can be vulnerable. You can open up, and I ain't got no skin in the game if I'm sitting across from you. You know what I mean? Like, I want the best for you genuinely. Sure. And you know, so I think that's a great place to start for people who feel like they don't have that, because then that person can sit down with you and identify what's going on in your world, like contextually and everything, and try to figure out, okay, well, if you're feeling that way, maybe it's because of these factors. Maybe these people got this kind of influence on you, and that's just something I can't do from this kind of distance from whoever the viewer might be. But they can sit down with a therapist and talk about that stuff and get going.
Yeah. So kind of wrap up a little bit of this with a little bit of a bow on top, so to speak. What is it? And I'm going to kind of revisit what the big topic of this, because I mean, this is, as y'all know, as you know, probably for sure, when it comes to psychology and therapy, we could go
days
on one topic. But I kind of just want to revisit the idea of providing an environment for men to, well, you know, be comfortable enough to open up. And let's just kind of revisit what that looks like and what steps can be taken moving forward to assure, like, the men in your life, your family, your friends, your loved ones. What's something we can do to, I guess, help alleviate some of that?
Yeah, to build that environment, you mean?
Yeah.
So one, remember, being by yourself is different than being alone, and we want to really minimize people feeling alone around us, and so providing that is oftentimes the doorway to get it back, right? And make it weird.
Well, and I mean,
if it's uncomfortable,
it's gonna be weird.
If it's uncomfortable. And I say that obviously, guys, you know yourself. Don't go too far. But like, if it's uncomfortable, these things don't get talked about, and so then they don't get changed. So
that's why it's uncomfortable.
Exactly. So if we don't want to make it uncomfortable anymore, we gotta normalize it. How you normalize it? Keep doing it. And so say things to your bros like, "Listen, man, I love you. And I don't care if you think that's weird or not." Like, say it don't have to be these real melodramatic conversations. It can just be these comments here and there, or like you go off with your bro by yourself and be like, "Hey, man, what you got going on?"
And I do think that's big, because I mean, not to get like too sappy here, but like, I appreciate it when I can just like hug a friend of mine and it's not weird. Like, it's cool. Love you, bro. Like, good to see you. Like, take care. So I say that to say I think it's good that you've hit on. It doesn't always have to be this big melodramatic conversation. It can be just those small things that help build your peers up.
And dog, practice it, especially if you're one of those folks who don't have a lot of practice turning thoughts and feelings into words. Man, you're not gonna know how to do it, bro. I mean, if you did know how to do it, it wouldn't be hard, right? So like, it's hard because you don't have practice, right? So practice it, and you always have a chance to talk to them again. And if not, you'll have another relationship eventually where you can have a conversation that you can use what you learned from the last time to do those things. Vulnerability is not a bad thing. It's actually something we all do. It's just we don't always notice it when we're doing it. We don't always know that that's what we're fearing when we're uncomfortable. And then maybe there's other things. Of course, people have all kinds of stories. So maybe it ain't just that. Maybe it's other stuff. But I mean, I think providing that is a good way to get it back. And then also trying to understand yourself. Is it uncomfortable for you to do these things? Why is it uncomfortable for you to do these things? And to what degree are you willing to practice that? Make yourself uncomfortable enough to change, but not so uncomfortable that you feel raw and exposed and all these things like that. And remember, every opportunity is something you can learn from and grow from, bro. And so if you have a conversation, you go, man, I don't know if that really went correct. It's gonna come back around. Maybe not with that person, but maybe even with a different person. Then you're gonna say, I want to word it like this time. And then the more you do that, the more you practice it, the better you get at it, like anything else.
Yeah.
Like anything else.
Yeah, I think it's very important to ultimately, all of that is true, yes, but ultimately, because not even just as a man, but as a human, it's not healthy to keep those things in. It does lead down a path of destruction, and if you need help, if you need to talk to someone, reach out. Find that environment where you can talk, and like let's be frank. There are some issues that I think probably only need to be discussed between men.
Sure. Men-related
issues, just like there's women-related issues.
Sure.
So I think to kind of bullet it out a little bit, find that environment, find an environment that you trust, people that you love, and you know the answer to that before Justin does or I do.
Right.
We have those people in our life. If you don't have those people in your life, there are professional tools that you can search out, and a lot of them are free. Like there is free stuff out there that you can find. And now that I think about it, we could probably find a way to find those resources and link them at some point.
Sure, yeah, we could probably do that. Yeah.
But I did kind of want to wrap this up here. We are running a little over time. But yeah, that was an environment for men.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go. I'm sure it'll come back around for the future conversation.
And it will, because I think that none of these things get discussed. I mean, we have that so-called environment right now where we can talk about those things. That's kind of what I want, and we've talked about this. That's kind of what we want this to be. We want this to be an environment for men to talk about those things.
And not just men,
sure. But because of our perspective and who we are, clearly we're going to have a little bit more insight on that side of things.
Facts.
But yeah, to just kind of wrap it up, we hope you've enjoyed it. We hope you've taken something from it.
Yeah. And shout out to our camera guy, Sean, in the background. New daddy, Papa Sean out here. New daddy, baby boy.
Sean's put in a lot of hard work. So
yes, sir.
We love you and appreciate you, Sean.
Yeah, man.
Love you, Justin.
All right,
appreciate
boys.
you being
I
here.
love you.
And we'll see you guys next time. For Mental Caffeine, I'm Landon.
And I'm Justin.
And
see you later.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.